Hey guys, it's Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about what is the top 10 internet service providers in the United States. So we've got a fair bit of information we're going to go over. Basically, I'm going to give you the top 10 or what you could consider the largest internet service providers, others also called ISPs in the United States of America. So, currently, at the time of this video, there is exactly 2,669 internet service providers in the United States. Now, I'd like to point out that this may not include a lot of your really small, not noticeable local outfits. It does include, from what I saw on this quick list that I pulled up, a lot of local outfits, even ones that I've never even heard of before that we somehow represent. But I do want to throw out there that, there's probably some new internet companies springing about here and there throughout the United States. Some of them probably fold up a little later too, but for the purposes of this video, according to the internet and according to the sources I looked up, there's 2,669 internet service providers currently active in the United States, with 891 of those being DSL providers, 224 of those being copper line providers, like old, I guess you could say, that are running, they're providing internet and potentially phone service through copper lines. So that would be a hybrid of DSL and analog phone service. And with 452 of them being cable companies that provide some form of broadband, possibly even fiber internet, and also, of course, cable TV over the same broadband type circuit. So, of these 2,669 providers, we're going to go into who the 10 largest are, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background of how we actually work with some of these guys. So, number one, Altice USA, formerly known as Suddenlink. Altice USA, some of you guys may not know who they are if you're watching on the East Coast. We actually work with them quite a bit on the West Coast areas, like in California and Texas. Altice USA, formerly known as Suddenlink, which is the name that most of you have heard of them by, is typically a broadband provider. They don't typically do DSL. They are almost strictly, at least in our endeavors with them, broadband. Sometimes they can deliver fiber. I do believe they have T1, and they also do cable television. What we have seen mostly has been business broadband in not only business offices, but also in home offices as well. They tend to be pretty reliable on the service side, but like any carrier, they have their pros and cons. But they tend to be one of the better carriers in the areas out west where Comcast is not available. Number two, AT&T Internet Services. Now, this is a funny one because when I did the research on this, I kept wondering, well, where the heck is Verizon at? And I realized that AT&T and Verizon are kind of one and the same through the whole, for those of you who are watching this that are my age or older, you know that AT&T and Verizon have gone through, multiple name changes and monopoly takeovers and breakdowns by the government and so on and so forth. So it's always a change of faces with those guys. But AT&T and Verizon to some degree are one and the same. So for the purposes of this, number two is AT&T Internet Services. Now, AT&T is a funny one because we've worked with them quite a bit across the United States on new accounts and in switching people from AT&T to other service. Typically, unfortunately for AT&T, it tends to usually be either us switching somebody from AT&T to another service or us helping that individual or business consolidate their services to something for a lower cost. This is because AT&T doesn't offer any type of real broadband other than through Verizon, but we'll get to that in a minute. What we typically only ever see is three things. AT&T UVerse, which is DSL, and it is not a very good speed for businesses, and it is definitely not a good speed if you're somebody that is using a hosted voice over IP phone system, or you're looking at entertaining some sort of voice over IP phone system. DSL just in general, not just from AT&T, but from any carrier, just does not have the bandwidth to be able to reliably support a voice over IP system. The next step up for AT&T would be their T1, which is typically overpriced and underdelivers. We kind of call T1 a DSL on steroids, which means even on steroids, it's still not enough speed for the average business, especially if you've got multiple employees or if you need to run voice over IP. So the next step up after that would be fiber. AT&T's fiber service is excellent. It's good not only in major metropolitan areas, but it is also easy to get in very rural areas, and it's what we commonly see in rural areas. The catch or the problem, it's really, really expensive. It is typically not cost effective for the average business, definitely not for the startup business, and it really can't even be justified cost-wise for the average business in general, small business. So that being said, Verizon, which again is part of AT&T, would typically be your best bet for most people. Verizon also only really offers DSL in most areas. However, if you're lucky, Verizon has what we call Verizon Fios, which is incredibly well priced and incredibly reliable. If you're in an area where you can get Fios, get it. By all means, get it. It's some of the best bang for your buck for whatever you're paying, like for your dollar per megabyte. And also, it is a symmetrical service. So it means that, whereas with typical carriers, you would say get 50 megabytes down and only get 5 megabits up, with Verizon Fios, typically everywhere you go, it's symmetrical. So you would quite literally get, if you got 50 megs download, you get 50 megabytes upload. So it's the best bang for your buck. So anyways, moving on. Number 3, Cable One. We've not worked with them much at all, but Cable One, according to the list, is the number 3 largest provider in the United States. Number 4, Centurylink. We've worked with these guys as well, and we tend to see them on the East Coast mostly. I'm not really sure if they're Midwest or if they're out West, but we tend to see them quite a bit East Coast, especially in Virginia, our home state. Centurylink we tend to see in a lot of areas that are rural and semi-rural areas. They tend to offer things such as DSL. They can offer broadband, but we've not seen it much. It's typically usually DSL, T1, or some sort of fiber. Don't quote me on this, but I think CenturyLink also has some forms of satellite that you can get also that is known to be pretty reliable. But from what we've seen, by all accounts, CenturyLink tends to be a pretty reliable carrier with pretty fair prices. And if you can get them in an area and they're the only thing that you can get, they're not a bad provider to go with. Not bad pricing and pretty good serviceability in the regions where they claim to have footprint. Number 5, Charter Communications. Now, for those of you who don't know, Charter Communications is the parent company for what used to be called Time Warner Cable, which is now called Spectrum, or what we work with a lot, Spectrum Business. We really like Spectrum Business because Spectrum Business not only has very reliable broadband services and fiber services, their footprint tends to be really good. So that's number 1. Serviceability is good. Number 2, they tend to be, I guess the best way to put it is they tend to be very good about upfront costs to the customer. So if you're ever looking at Spectrum Business in an area where they come back and say, hey, your location is serviceable, however, there's going to be some construction needed. Typically in our endeavors with Spectrum Business, we've not seen them charge the customer for the construction. Some carriers are really big about that because there may be some upfront costs to like run a wire across the street or create a trench or whatever it may be. But typically in our endeavors, Spectrum has always been really good about saying, hey, there's going to be some construction that is required for you, but don't worry, we're going to cover it so that we can get you service. And then they cover it, and then really you're just looking at delay time. Point number 3 that we really like about Spectrum Business is, and this is the big one, they are really big about no contract. I've got customers that have done everything from broadband to voice over IP phone systems to you name it and had no contract with their service. Literally gotten the special promotions and the special promotions and the special pricing that anybody else would expect at the start of a contract or an account, but been on a month-to-month with special pricing. So that's one big thing about Spectrum Business or Spectrum in general that we like in the regions that they're in. They've got a wide variety of services, they've got a great footprint, and they are usually really, really good about contract terms, which is typically no contract at all, like month to month. So you really can't argue with that. If you can get a month-to-month contract with also the same pricing and promotions that you'd normally expect if you had to sign like a 24 or a 36-month agreement. Number 6, Comcast. For those of you who watch our videos a lot and play around on our Twitter and our social media channels, you know that we're a big Comcast advocate. While we know that they aren't the best when it comes to customer service in the industry, I won't lie, they tend to be one of the leaders because they simply have one of the largest footprints in the United States, meaning they have some of the best serviceability. Where others can't service certain areas, Comcast can, and that's just that. So they tend to win quite a bit when it comes to that. Comcast Business, specifically in this particular scenario, because that's what we represent, is Comcast Business. So also I wanted to throw out there that Comcast is also known by the name Xfinity. I'm not really sure what that whole deal was, but I think through some, change of words or change of divisioning or whatever, I think Comcast mainly goes by the name Xfinity these days. We still call them Comcast because we know them as the good old boys at Comcast, but for the purposes of this video, we can go ahead and say that, business number 6 is Comcast/Xfinity. Number 7, Consolidated Communications. I've not worked with them much, not had anybody call us looking for them. We do represent them, but I don't know much about them. So maybe you too could be the first person to call me and say, hey, Prince, could you get me a quote for Consolidated Communications? They are number 7 on the list. Number 8 on the list is Cox Communication, which is another large one as well. Cox we have worked with quite a bit. They are nationwide U.S. based, but we tend to see Cox mostly in the Virginia Tidewater areas. In Virginia, when you start going closer to the coast, you start seeing a lot less of Comcast and you start seeing more of Cox Communications. Cox tends to do things such as broadband, fiber, and then cable TV. They're a great provider. They tend to be very reliable, and they tend to, in our endeavors with them, have a similar contract structure to what we see with Comcast, where you would see your typical 24-month to 36-month, 2 to 3 year contract terms to be able to get promotional pricing and things like that for business and for residential services. We definitely recommend Cox Communications, and we think that they're a great provider, and they've definitely got good footprint and serviceability in the areas where they're in. Number 9, Frontier Communications. I don't know much about them, but I've had more of the guys at the brokerage that we work with that allows us to be able to sell for all the carriers tell me that we should be selling more of them. I'm not even really sure what areas they're in, but according to the list online, they are the 9th largest ISP, internet service provider in the United States. And wrapping up for number 10 largest provider is Mediacom. Mediacom is a provider of DSL, broadband, and also cable TV. If you're looking for Mediacom, then obviously you can contact us. Again, I don't know much about these guys as well, but according to the list, they are number 10. So that concludes the video, the 10 largest internet service providers in the United States. I do want to point out that at the time of this video, it's 2019, so this could change. I don't see any of these players going anywhere anytime soon because we've worked with most of them over the years. Again, if you're watching this video and you're thinking that you need phone, internet service, or maybe even a phone system or cable TV for your business through any of these providers, we represent them all. I can save you the time and energy of having to call these people and shop for pricing and quotes and dare and compare and get you quotes on any that you like. Again, this is Prince Rich with Rich Technology Group, and I'll chat with you guys again in the next video.